Hello and welcome to Records Retention, Public Records, and Historical Records Training. For Public Records, we're going to be covering Ohio's Sunshine Laws, the Board of Trustee Policies for Public Records and Records Retention. What is a public record? We are going to have a quiz, so get ready. And what to do with a public records request. Ohio has two sunshine laws that we're going to talk about, the Ohio's Public Records Act and Ohio's Open Meetings Act. And the idea behind these laws is to prevent public institutions from keeping information hidden away in secret in the dark, behind closed doors. Instead, we want to open those doors and let the sun shine in and let citizens learn about what their government agencies are doing. So these laws were enacted in the 1950s and 60s to assist citizens who wanted to obtain information from the state of Ohio and public institutions like YSU. YSU is a public institution of higher education in the state of Ohio, and it is subject to the Sunshine Laws. I am going to be focusing today on the Public Records Act, but please know that YSU is also subject to the Open Meetings Act. The YSU Board of Trustees is the decision-making body of the university. Its meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And if you've noticed, they're open to the public. You can see journalists there. Minutes are taken at that meeting. You can find the minutes on the website. These are all things we do to comply with the Open Meetings Act. I would like you to appreciate that these sunshine laws are really the hallmarks of democracy. These laws provide a critical tool to fight corruption. They hold governments accountable. They increase government efficiency and responsiveness, and they promote civic trust. So I included this image of a young woman riding with a flag because I'd like you to feel patriotic about your duty to provide public records. There are businessmen and women all over the world who live in countries that do not have these laws, that do not have these tools to fight corruption, and they really struggle. Corruption weakens long-term economic growth. It hinders prosperity, and they're very important tools in a democracy. So these laws apply to government institutions and public universities, but they do not apply to private companies. I'd also like to stress that we are all responsible for public records at YSU. Now, some individuals are designated as records custodians to oversee retention and disposal of records in their area, and that is why you're here for the training. So the idea is we train you as the records custodian to make sure that you can answer questions, guide and train the employees in your area. But really, everyone is responsible for their own records. Even employees who leave the university need to purge their records before they depart. So here are two Board of Trustee policies pertaining to public records and records management. I'm just alerting you to these. You can find them on the MOG Library website. Please visit the website and review these policies which are in line with the Ohio Sunshine Laws. The training we're providing is based on these policies, and what we're talking about is tracked in the policies. Okay, what is a public record? A public record is any document, device, or item regardless of the physical form or characteristic, including paper, electronic, email, or other format that's created or received by or comes under the jurisdiction of a public office like YSU and documents the organization, functions, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or activities of the office. So all records of the university are public unless they are specifically exempt from disclosure under law. So for example, medical records are exempt from disclosure under law, and they are not considered public records. So you can see in the bottom, I have a little three-part test that I use when I'm looking at something to decide if it's a public record. This is based on the three prongs of the definition in our policy. Was it stored on a fixed medium? Was it created, received, or kept by YSU? And does it document the activities of YSU? When is something a record? Let's go into that a little bit more. And the answer is when it can be stored in a fixed medium. So all of these items here can be stored in a fixed medium. Email, voicemail, text messages, recordings of Zooms, and of course paper. So except for thoughts and unrecorded conversations, most public information is stored on a fixed medium of some sort. You should think broadly when you think about what is a record. Think about analog storage and digital storage as well. Public records do not include things like personal notes you take at a meeting to jog your own memory later. Now, if you do take those notes and share them with other employees, You are moving into the world of a public record because now you're sharing them and discussing them with other employees. But if you just take personal notes for yourself, those are not considered a public record. Unrecorded oral conversations between employees are not public records. So if your two employees are standing at the fountain discussing an issue related to YSU business, that is not a public record because it wasn't recorded. Now, if you go back to your office and you send an email and you say, per our conversation this afternoon, I'm going to do the following, XYZ. Now we have a public record when you went back to your office and you wrote down the content of the conversation in an email. Unsolicited catalogs, junk mail, spam sent to YSU are not public records. We did not ask for those. Listserv materials. Any personal emails unrelated to the university are not public records because they're not documenting the activities of the university. Faculty papers deemed to belong to the faculty are not public records. Journals, books, or other library materials just kept in our library are not deemed public records. And again, certain documents are exempt from disclosure by law, things like medical records, FERPA records, records protected by attorney-client privilege. Those are not considered public records. Okay, it's time for the quiz. First one, personal calendar you keep at work. Let's assume this is a written old-school calendar documenting your personal activities. So it's definitely stored in a fixed medium because it's written down on paper. It's not really created, received, or kept by YSU, and it's definitely not documenting the activities of YSU because it's about your personal business. So that is not a public record. Now we're moving on to emails on YSU's server discussing an employee's upcoming wedding. So it's stored on a fixed medium. It's on YSU's server, but it is definitely not documenting the activities of YSU. Now if we change this example up, and we say that an employee was renting the stadium club for their wedding reception, and there was a problem, maybe it was double booked, and they're sending emails complaining to facilities, well, now it's a public record because it's documenting the business of YSU. Screenshots of Snapchat messages between two faculty members discussing why she sponsored travel to a conference. Now because someone took a screenshot, it is stored on a fixed medium. If they did not take a screenshot, it would have disappeared, and then we would not have had an actual record. It's created by two employees, and it's documenting the activity because they're discussing their travel, so that would be considered a public record. A draft policy document in the business school going over internship requirements distributed to faculty for review and comment. This is definitely stored on a fixed medium. It's definitely kept and created by YSU, and it's documenting the activities. Now this is what we're going to call a transient document because it's just a draft, and we'll discuss that in more detail. Work-related phone messages, voice messages left by your supervisor and your cell phone when you're working at home during the pandemic. Because they were recorded, it's stored on a fixed medium. They're created, received, or kept by YSU because you're an employee working at home. And it's documenting activities of YSU. It's involving your duties as a public employee at the university. So that is also a public record. It is also a transient record, just like the draft policy, which we're going to talk about in more detail. And finally, study abroad student records that were shredded according to the YSU records retention schedule. So they were stored on a fixed medium at one time. They were in paper files. They were created and received by YSU. They're definitely documenting the activities of a study abroad program, but they're not kept by YSU because we were entitled to legally dispose of them according to our records retention schedule. So we don't have them anymore. So they are no longer a public record subject to disclosure. And we're going to talk about in that situation how you can simply fill out a certificate of records destruction form and share that with any party that's looking for these records that have already been shredded. Okay, so transient records are records that have short-lived administrative, legal, or fiscal value, and they can be disposed of in an appropriate manner once that use has expired, as long as there's no legal hold on those records. And retention, we cannot say it's for this number of hours or days because it's event-driven. It could be as few as a few hours or could be as long as several days or weeks. So here are some examples. Preliminary drafts. When superseded, the final draft is what you need to hold on to. Voicemails and telephone messages. You're permitted to delete those when you no longer need them. Memorandum, paper, email pertaining to scheduling an event. Once that event is over, you don't need to hold on to them. Documents designated as superseded or updated, user copies that are not the original documents, routing slips, telephone messages, post-it notes, things that you never intended to keep long-term you can dispose of when you no longer need them. So what to do when you get a public records request? So the first thing, please take all requests seriously. Even if they come in an anonymous form, or if they come in orally, or if someone arrives in your office in an Elvis costume, it doesn't matter. All requests need to be taken seriously. So you could have a professional young woman come in like this woman in the picture and say, "Hello, I'm Attorney Smith, and I need these records." Or you could have someone come in with a bizarre costume and make the same request. You need to take both requests seriously. There is no required form for records request. They do not have to complete anything in writing. Now, if the request is a routine one, and your department has been trained on how to handle public records requests, you can respond to it. If the request is not routine, or you don't know how to handle it, you should call the Office of General Counsel and ask for guidance. And again, if the records sought were already properly destroyed, you can just simply inform them of that and attach the Certificate of Records Destruction. This is the policy on records management. It outlines the management methods for YSU records. YSU adopted the manual used by other Ohio Public University for its records retention. So what is records management? Records management is the systematic control of all records from creation or receipt through processing, distribution, maintenance and retrieval, and to final disposition. It is the control of a record's life cycle. Why do we need a records management program? We need to document management decisions. We need to have a historical reference of transactions of events. We need to enhance our organization's operational efficiencies. By reducing junk, we will have less filing errors and faster information retrieval. We will have cost savings through space saving, staff saving time, and other equipment savings. People tend to keep things longer than their retention period. While it does take time to go through records, it does end up saving time in the future. We need to demonstrate regulatory compliance with Section 149.33 of the Ohio Revised Code. And we need to provide litigation support. A good records management program protects the organization in case of litigation. It ensures that the records that should exist do exist and the records that do not exist do not exist. It also ensures that records prepared by the university can be readily admitted into evidence to support the university's claims. It is also protection. For failure to produce documents in response to a court order can effectively be overcome by citing evidence that the records had been destroyed in the regular course of business under an approved records retention program prior to litigation. We also never want to selectively destroy records, but groups or classes of records in the regular course of business under an approved records management system. There are 3 steps to evaluating records. Step 1 is identify the records. Here we ask, what is a record? We already went over this, but I will remind you a record is all information regardless of format created or received by a university office that documents the functions, policies, procedures, decisions and operations or other activities of the office. I will focus on step 2, which is determining how long records should be kept. Here we will use the records retention schedule. We will also look at what to do with your records in the case of litigation. Step 3 is deciding what should be done with the records once they reach the end of their retention according to the records retention schedule. Here we have 2 options. 1, and most often, is to fill out a certificate of records destruction in order to destroy or dispose of the records. And the other is to fill out a certificate of records transfer to the archives and special collections for the records with enduring historical value. Different records have different outcomes. There are 5 general retentions for records: indefinite or permanent, long-term, which are longer than 10 years, immediate, 10 years or less, transient, which are while active, and non-records. It is important to note that a significant amount of documents that we handle on a daily basis fall into transient records and non-records. When we routinely and appropriately dispose of these records, we can more effectively expend our energies on managing those records which have extended value. If we do not perform these routine disposals of records with extremely short retention periods, we run the risk of generating such large volumes of documents that we will overwhelm our ability to effectively manage our records. In other words, we want to avoid the Pac-Man effect, where our non-records and transient records get in the way of our ability to access and manage our permanent, long-term, and short-term records. Remember, if it is not considered a public record, like emails discussing an upcoming wedding or birthday, it is not subject to the records retention policy or schedule, and you could just delete it. But if it is a true public record, including a transient record, the records retention schedule will tell you how to dispose of it. So let's jump into step 2 of using the records retention schedule to determine how long records should be kept. To access the YSU records retention schedule, go to the MOG Library website at www.mag.ysu.edu. On the right-hand side of the page, in the red box named Need Help, there is a link which says Records Management. You can click on that link and it will take you to the Records Management website. Or you could directly access the Records Management website by typing www.mag.ysu.edu/recordsmdt. Once you get to the Records Management website, you will see a red box on the right-hand side for documents and forms. Here is where you will find the Records Retention Schedule. Once you click on that box for the Records Retention Schedule, the PDF document will automatically download. Please bookmark this page for easy reference and for access to the Records Retention Schedule, the Certificate of Records Destruction, and the Certificate of Records Transfer form. You could also check for the most recent forms and updates. The YSU Retention Schedule is arranged as a functional series schedule. The schedule is arranged in general categories to cover various types of records for the entire university. This means a large group of records will fall into one retention category. Records may be harder to find because the descriptions are generalized. For example, if you are looking for study abroad student records in the schedule, you will not find a record series title which is listed as study abroad student records. Instead, you should look for student records for a college department, since study abroad is part of a college department. Read through the descriptions, which are listed under the title in italicized font, to find which record series title fits your group of records. Remember, we do not want to selectively destroy records, but rather groups of records. The record series title should be reflected on the destruction form. The retention schedule is also keyword searchable by hitting the Control and the F keys. The YSU Records Retention Schedule follows the Inter-University Council of Ohio's manual. You want to use the record series description to find the right record series title for your records. Once we find the right record series title for your records, we need to determine how long those records should be kept. The retention is given in number of years, so you need to know what time period is represented in your documents in order to determine whether or not you have kept them for the required time. If it is shorter than the amount of time given in the retention and disposition column, you keep your records until the time is up. If it is longer than listed, you could continue to the next step. The retention period is determined through state and national laws based on administrative, fiscal, and legal considerations. If the case of litigation comes up, or if there is a legal hold on your documents, please keep the documents until the litigation process is complete. If you are unsure about the process, or if it's complete, or if you have any questions about litigation, please contact the General Counsel's office. Before we continue to the third step, there are some things to consider about the records retention schedule. Oftentimes, people will ask what the term active means in the records retention schedule. Active generally means a record that is required for regular use and is generally referenced. This doesn't give us much guidance in regard to length of time, but there are some instances where we can narrow down this definition. In regard to contracts and events based on a timeline or event, active is until that timeline or event has passed. In regards to student documents, active is until the student is absent from the university for 3 consecutive semesters. You can determine this by using Banner to find which students are current or non-current. In regards to employee files, active is as long as a person is employed at YSU. So with the example given here, these records will be kept as long as a person is working at YSU and for 3 years after they leave the university. Transient documents are records containing information of short-term usefulness, which allow a public office to dispose of these records once they are no longer of administrative value. Retention is not a fixed period of time and is event-driven. It may be as short as a few hours and could be as long as several weeks or days. These include things like preliminary drafts when superseded, memorandum, paper or email pertaining to scheduling an event, documents designated as updated, user copies or not original documents, and routing slips. You want to keep these documents while active and while you need them, and then you could destroy them. You do not need prior authority to destroy transient records, so no certificate of records destruction is needed. Remember, a large portion of our documents are transient documents, and records other than the official set may be destroyed after the user no longer needs them. So, for example, if your department has copies of personnel files and human resources has the original personnel files, you can disregard the personnel files of those that have left your office if you no longer need them, or as long as HR has the official copy. Now let's move to the third step of deciding what should be done once retention is complete. Most oftentimes, once a record has reached the end of its retention, you will need to fill out a certificate of records destruction. Once you fill out that form, you send it to archives@ysu.edu. You need to wait to receive a signed form back before you can destroy your documents. You want to keep that signed form for your records. Should there be a public records request and you can't find the document, you have proof that the records were disposed of in the general course of business under an approved records management program. Once you receive your signed form back, you could then destroy the documents in a secure fashion, usually shredding through the University Vendor Protect and Shred. If something is marked as archival review in the retention schedule, please contact the archives and special collections. Your records might be a good candidate for transfer to the archives instead of destruction. To transfer record to the archives, call or email the YSU archives for transfer approval and fill out a records transfer form. You will then arrange with us a method of transfer of materials to the archives, digital or physical. If there are a small amount of documents, we can come pick them up. If there is a large amount of documents, we could arrange a pickup with the university mover. Digital documents can be sent either through email or through a shared drive. The Certificate of Records Destruction is found on the Records Management website in the Documents and Form box on the right-hand side of the web page. The first page of the Certificate of Records Destruction contains the administrative information to be filled out by the department. This form must be signed by a Records Management officer or the university archives before destruction can occur. It also includes a proposed date of destruction. Should the case of a public records request come up, we will know when those records were disposed of. The second page of the Certificate of Records Destruction contains the inventory page. Here, you will want to pull from the retention schedule the record series title, which contains the records your unit wants to destroy. You could use a separate row for each different record title, the IUC code, and the retention period. From your own records, you will want to include the inclusion dates, or the beginning and end dates, the format, paper or digital, the quantity, which could be listed as number of boxes, folders. For digital documents, it could be data or gigabyte size, and the method of destruction. Don't forget the litigation question at the bottom, and remember, if your documents are involved in any type of litigation or investigation, you keep those documents until that process is complete. You should not be filling out a certificate of records destruction for records that are involved in litigation. If you have paper copies that have been reproduced in digital format, you may destroy them if, and only if, the electronic document is a perfect and exact reproduction of the paper. The electronic document is available upon demand for public records requests, and if the paper documents are not involved as exhibits in pending litigation. Just note on the instruction form that the documents have been reproduced and stored in electronic format. We also want to remember that electronic formats also follow the same retention as paper formats. Confidential information must be disposed of in a secure fashion. Protect and Shred is the current university vendor on campus for shredding. Small amounts of records may be disposed of in the confidential collection bins found throughout various offices throughout campus. If you have a large amount of documents for disposal, you need to contact recycling. Typically, Protect and Shred comes to campus every 4 weeks to campus to empty bins and for large pickups. If you need to fill out a records transfer form, it is very similar to the destruction form. We have the administrative page on one side, and then the other is the inventory page. The archives uses these forms for our accession records and for information should there be a question about the records. Double-check the litigation question and let us know if there is confidential information. We need to know if we need to redact or restrict information in our collection. Items to consider for possible archival transfer include YSU publications, minutes from the board, committee, or department, record of programs or curriculum development, correspondence and files of deans, vice presidents, directors, or chairs, programs and flyers of events, photo and audiovisual material, and self-studies, histories, or accreditation reports. We do have a lot of these items mentioned. However, a lot of our collections have gaps and are incomplete. So there's a chance that we could fill in some of those gaps through records that your department transfers to the archives. We do have a special need of anything prior to statehood, which is 1968. That is the most incomplete area of our collection. So anything you could find prior to 1968 would be greatly appreciated.